monthly edition of our podcast brought to you by ICNA Council for Social Justice. My name is Imam Khalid Abdul Fattah Griggs. I am the Executive Director of ICNA for Council Justice. And we have a very interesting and timely discussion tonight. And this discussion is about Juneteenth and the Juneteenth celebration. And the title of our discussion this evening is A Juneteenth Reflection, Rhetoric and Resistance, Crafting Narratives for Liberation. This is a very important topic and a very important discussion that we're about to have. And I would like to introduce our guests. First, I'd like to bring on Brother Mustafaa Carroll. He is the executive director for CARE in Dallas, Fort Worth. He's also the convener for MABL in Dallas, Fort Worth, which is the Muslim Alliance of Black Lives. And joining us this evening is Dr. Jamel Coy Hudson. Dr. Jamel is the doctoral lecturer of rhetoric and public advocacy for CUNY Baruch College. He's also the MABL convener in Long Island, New York. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome, brothers.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Okay, alhamdulillah. Thank you so much for joining us. There have been celebrations all around the country today in recognition of Juneteenth. But before we get into that discussion, I'd like to ask Dr. Jamel to give us an understanding about rhetoric and how this relates to the topic that we're discussing this evening. As I said in your introduction, you're not only a rhetorician, but you're also a doctor in rhetoric, public rhetoric. So, Jamel, could you explain a little bit of that for us, please?
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمد عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم. I thank you, your colleague Briggs, Brother Mustafaa Carroll, MABL-CSJ, for holding this space. Rhetoric at its core is the art of persuasion. It's how ideas are conveyed and communicated through symbols. I do teach rhetoric. My PhD is in communication. Rhetoric is a specialization in the broader discipline. My focus is on African American rhetoric, which means I look at the artwork, the songs, sermons, texts, writings that are crafted by people from the Black African diaspora community. That's artists, that's leaders who have used rhetoric for resistance. And I think that's the theme today. How has rhetoric been used for resistance? Well, if you give me just a second, Imam, I'll describe and discuss rhetoric's origin. Often rhetoric is associated with ancient Greece, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Rhetoric's origin can be found in Africa. The first text that instructs how to speak and how to engage in persuasive communication, it's called the Instructions of Ptah-Hotep. It was written over 4,000 years ago on papyrus. So rhetoric has African roots, and we as Muslims know the power of words, language. The verbiage of the Quran is the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, kun fayakun, be and it is. And these wahi, revelation, is the word that we read and we reflect on. And coupled with the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the prophetic model of communication of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who had concise speech, we have models of what rhetoric may look like. Now, I approach this discussion today on rhetoric as a descendant of people who experienced chattel slavery in this nation, the auction block, the transatlantic slave trade. So my culture as an African American and my research and commitment to the justice work, coupled with and grounded in my Islamic framework, is how I approach my field or interest in rhetoric, the Black rhetorical tradition, the Black tradition of resistance through fugitive means when writing wasn't allowed, still learning how to create fugitive slave narratives and songs and artwork that in the face of white tyranny and the we the people, not including our people, still declaring that our humanity will be valued, and we'll declare that with our own stories. So that's what it means when we discuss this rhetoric and resistance, telling our story. We have to control our narrative and share our story, because it's being omitted. We know the books and the efforts now in the text to whitewash and make what has occurred erased from the pages. So inshallah, we could talk more about the things I'm interested in and would like to be in dialogue with you guys about as well. But I'll end with that answer of what rhetoric is more generally, and then what I specifically look at, which is, again, the Black American Islamic rhetorical tradition. Inshallah.
Alhamdulillah, sounds very good. Thank you so much. And now to you, Brother Mustafaa, could you give us the historical significance of this day, June 19th? Why is there a celebration?
Okay, I will, and it really is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's very significant, but and the fact that you said historical, you mean in the history. You know, if you look at the history of African Americans in this country, in the early 1500s, around 12.5 million enslaved Africans were brought to the Americas and to modern day South Carolina in 1526. So if our people were brought at that time, that means it was approximately 339 years that they endured slavery. The official slave trade to colonial America began in 1619 and lasted and extended or existed for 246 years. And approximately 10 to 30% of those folks that were enslaved were believed to be Muslims. And then we had to endure a whole history, too long a history for me to talk about on this podcast, but I'll just give a few examples. Like in 1704, we had the slave patrols that begun as an early form of American policing, and I dare say that the culture that created still exists to this day. Between 1775 and 1783, Muslims were fought in the Revolutionary War, and people with Muslim names were in the military muster rolls, including Bambat Muhammad, Yusuf bin Ali, Joseph bin Haley, Joseph Saba, etc., and many more. In 1824, one of the more significant issues, one of the slave owners, Thomas Spalding, allowed his slaves to actually practice their religion openly, and even granted them permission to build a place that they could serve as an Islamic place of worship. Now, technically, that's a masjid, and I've scoured the books and everything, and you can't find the record of this, but this was, at least we know that much. And this could be considered the first Muslim community and perhaps the first masjid in the United States. And as we know, our history here is just intertwined, Islamic history and our history as Muslims and our history as African Americans who were formerly enslaved and oppressed, etc., was intertwined. In 1856, you had Dred Scott sue the government for his freedom, and it failed. In 1857. The U.S. Supreme Court declared that no blacks, whether they're free or not, could never be citizens of the United States. So enter President Lincoln, who was elected in 1860. 5 months later, he's fighting a civil war between the Union and the Confederacy. And the central conflict to that was about the dispute over whether slavery should be permitted in the Western territories. And everybody pretty much understood that would lead to more slavery, or an ultimate expansion of slavery. And so there was a war that was brought on behind that. So in 63, during the war, President Lincoln established that all enslaved people in Confederate States against the Union shall be then, henceforth, and forever free. And that was supposedly that was the end of slavery. That was when the Emancipation Proclamation was made. And therefore, after that, the years following, freed people in Texas organized the first of what was to become the annual celebration. They called it Jubilee Day on June 19th. And it ultimately became Juneteenth, and that's where that came from. And so that was a short synopsis of what the historical significance of Juneteenth is that 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, Black folks in Texas learned that they were freed by General Granger, who went to Galveston to uphold that proclamation, and that's how we got to the place we are.
Okay, alhamdulillah, that's very good, very good. So in 1979, you're telling us that the state of Texas recognized June the 19th, 1865, as a holiday, but it was recognized, of course, in 1979, first in the state of Texas. You know, I ran across some information as well about this celebration, and it was very interesting that an elderly lady by the name of Opal Lee
Mm-hmm.
actually advocated and fought for this. And I found it very interesting too that she actually walked from, I guess it was from Texas to Washington, D.C., walking 2.5 miles every day
Mm-hmm.
to signify that time frame in which the rest of the enslaved African people were liberated, or at least not in formal chattel slavery. And
Mm-hmm.
2.5 years later, the message finally got down to Galveston that Black folks had been freed from slavery. It's a very interesting story.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Jamel, I would like you to uh, give us some reasons for the significance of Juneteenth being a national holiday and not just a Texas holiday.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And thank you, Brother Carroll, for giving us the timeline in the history and the important sojourn of people of African ancestry who were Muslims and those who were not, but still guided with a spiritual resistance and willingness to survive in the face of, again, the agony of chattel slavery. And thank you, Imam Khalid Briggs, for the insight. I know of the story of Opal Lee, and as you say, the story of 2 years post the Emancipation Proclamation. And then on April 9th, 1865, General Lee surrenders, so the war ends. So then another 90 days goes by until June 19th, Juneteenth, in that day of Jubilee. So I'll have some thoughts around, as you mentioned, the use of messaging and communication to have conveyed that news. But first, I'll address the thoughts I have for the question on why Juneteenth is not just for Texas. And we have our brother Carroll from the Republic of Texas here. And we love Texas, and Texas is the Lone Star State. And there's no doubt that entering the city of Galveston in that particular community, receiving the good news, is worth commemorating. And it's not something that should be solely commemorated in Texas. Every state in these United States should commemorate Juneteenth because the entire nation is implicated in the crime of chattel slavery. Slavery wasn't just in the South, right? It's the economic engine that built this nation, right? We made cotton king, planted, toiled the soil and worked from can't see in the morning, can't see at night. And the universities of the North, they acknowledge more recently that their funds, their immense wealth that built the foundation of this nation drips with the blood of our ancestors. So we talk Juneteenth is not just for the region. I sincerely feel that the fabric of the red, white, and blue, right, has the blood of Black people, many who will go unknown, but they're sheroes and heroes that must be noted. Why does Juneteenth mean something to all people who are committed to liberty, but particularly to those who were the descendants of the chattel slavery experience in this particular context? Because, and I don't have to go through the timeline now, our brother did a great job explaining the legal framework of a nation saying that a people are in bondage, right? So you just go to the Constitution, right? Black people are considered 3/5 a person. You're not part of the we the people at rhetoric that's being said, the verbiage and the laws that protect you. There's no equal protection under the law. So I can only imagine what it may have felt like on that day on June 19th, right? Major General Granger comes in and makes the information known to you, right? You're made aware of the information. And that can be, I'm sure, a sense of disbelief, of tears, of joy, of things that at times you're not able to describe, but it's ineffable. Like the words are not there, but there's a feeling of what freedom may have felt like and what it feels like. Now, why that matters and why Juneteenth must be seen in a larger context, not just for Texas. I think about the tools, the technology available. Imagine if there was social media, technology that could have conveyed through WhatsApp, through Twitter, through YouTube, right? That, hey, this legal framework, this proclamation has been done. And as Brother Carroll noted, that legislation, that Emancipation Proclamation dealt with states that seceded from the Union. There were still slave states that stayed in the Union. And we're now clear with the history that Lincoln had really no interest in per se emancipating the enslaved Africans. There was the Union was losing at the beginning of the war, and people got in his ear, like Brother Frederick Douglass, and shared with him, maybe you should enroll some of the African Americans to enroll and to fight in the army, Union Army. And Lincoln was hesitant. He didn't want to send black bodies to the South to shoot white Southern segregationists. So when the Emancipation Proclamation signed, note that it's for states that seceded, and the states that seceded didn't really care too much for the legal perspective and vantage point of DC. So when we talk sedition, when we talk insurrection, when we talk about a state turning on its or people turning on their state and acting against the law, there's an embodiment of that in the Confederacy. And this still, we'll talk about the legacy and the narrative of how it's been maintained and kept, because the same way we have a Juneteenth, there are states that recognize Robert E. Lee Day. So we have to, again, engage in this storytelling of our people. This is our story, right? It matters to tell that story, because those who came before us, this is verbiage mentor of mine used, right? They did more with less. Harriet Tubman didn't have the technology, but she did more, right? People who came before us, they did a lot. And when the news came, that struggle continues to really have what it means to be free, something tangible, because I hope we get to a little bit time later on. I want to talk about, if we have some time, the evolution of this enslavement, right? So chattel slavery may have ended, but that's the beginning of the prison industrial complex and the school to prison pipeline. And there's a whole continuation of enslavement and in captivity today. So Juneteenth matters. It can be a yearly wake-up call that we commemorate and look in the mirror and say, are we still enslaved? Poverty keeps us enslaved. Health disparities, inferior schools and preparation for the ability to make a means and way to live. Frederick Douglass famously said that freedom was freedom to be subject to the winds and rains of life, right? When the emancipated slave was given its freedom, there were newly arriving immigrants coming to this nation who were getting land from the government with low interest rates to build economic basis. So the freedom for the enslaved, formerly enslaved, meant freedom to hunger, freedom to the winds and rain. So what needs to be a part of this discourse of Juneteenth frequently and often is the need to have atonement, reparations, and stopping the war on Black lives is a constant component, I think, that makes, again, every state of this union a part of the history and should have a commemorative date to pause and reflect on what that history means if this nation wants to live out what it has put on paper.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's very well said. The aspect or the dimension of Juneteenth as it's been celebrated around the country uh, is oftentimes just that of celebration. And just like any other federal holiday, many people just take the occasion to don't go to work. Many jobs, folks don't have to work on this particular on these holidays, federal holidays, and it's a celebratory atmosphere for those who are serious about acknowledging Juneteenth. And Brother Mustafaa, could you tell us what are some of I mean, I know it differs from different locales, but what are some of the things that are actually done on this day to commemorate this 2.5 year period after the official end of slavery in the so-called Union?
Well, I haven't seen a lot done other than what you said just a few minutes ago. I haven't seen a lot done. Like we have a lot of celebrations, and they may have marches. This weekend here in Dallas, in Plano, they actually are bringing Miss Opal Lee, or she was going to come to lead a walk, and that's going to happen. And they cut the walk short on her behalf.
Yeah, she's 98 years old, I
98
understand.
years old, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, what a legacy. So they actually are bringing her to this function. I'm in 2 and 3 different functions this weekend, and she's supposed to walk. There's a walk, there's a commemoration, there's a discussion, a strategic meeting. I think that I'm glad to see that people are having. They've done similar things with the MLK Day and MLK March, that you'll have people that have a day of service. You have strategies around current issues. I think there needs to be more coalition building around this, especially, we do, as Muslims, we do a lot of interfaith stuff, but we need to do more intra-faith things. We need to reach out to our whole community. I know that people are shy about calling them brother, but I call everybody that says that they're a Muslim a brother, because we have examples where people actually came on to the deen. So I don't, for me, I'm just a Muslim. That's it. So, but nevertheless, I think we need to expand our interfaith. We need to start talking about those coalitions and what it means, and have strategic ways of dealing with some of the issues that we're dealing with, because we should be further ahead than we are, whether you're African American or whether you're Muslim. With all the information, knowledge we have, and especially now with the technology, we should be further ahead in terms of some of the challenges that we face.
Yeah, very good. I ran across a quote from Miss Opal Lee a few years ago, and she capsulized some of what we're talking about right now. And she was saying that people think that it's a Black thing when it's not. It's not a Texas thing. It's not that either. Juneteenth means freedom, and I mean freedom for everybody. And she went on to talk about how it was such a liberatory event, not just for enslaved people, but for the enslavers as well, for them to try to reclaim their humanity and start acting like citizens of the world and of the country, and not just the overlords of a targeted group of people. So the emancipation of African people in this country was much, I would dare say, it was just at that moment in time, it was just as much of an emancipation for the enslavers as it had been for those who had been enslaved for hundreds of years. And, I just want to make this point real quickly too. I'm old enough to remember Dr. Jamel was probably a little kid. Brother Mustafaa and I are old enough.
Me too.
That was a very long process, a very long, drawn out process before the holiday, the national recognition of a holiday for Dr. Martin Luther King actually came into existence. And this long, drawn out period actually brought out some of the lingering racist ideas that many of the national and state legislators had towards people of African descent. And so when we look at how critical it was for this emancipation of African American people, as Dr. Jamel, you have referenced that so much of that same mindset has been so much of a very primary element in the extension of that slavery, of the neo-slavery that came about after the official emancipation of African people. So could you go into that just a little bit more, this continuation of conditions that restricting people of African descent? And also, if both of you could just give some words of wisdom for all of the people of this nation, but specifically to African American people, not to just recognize this day as another day I don't have to go to work, another day I can just get drunk and or do whatever I'm gonna do without having any meaningful recognition of this day.
Yeah, thank you, Imam. And I received the plate. I pray to consume it and respond with some answers that address the points. You gave me a lot to consider, as did Brother Carroll, because Juneteenth is not just a day off, right, from work. And I want to speak to, I guess, in my first part of my response, that federal legislation, right? Juneteenth, and I think you had earlier asked me around and I mentioned Dr. King's birthday and the movement, the effort to have that day commemorated. I think I can maybe compare, juxtapose, look at the two, and think about how, as we've been mentioning, pioneers like Uncle Lee worked hard to have the day acknowledged by the nation. Tireless grandmother from Texas, she's referred to as. There are many sheroes and heroes who have worked on the small or the local level. Then I think of Stevie Wonder and how he used his prominence and other artists to give us a song that's now a part of the culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I have a remark to say around our cultural output and our artwork.
I thought you were going to say you would sing the song. You have such a gift for
I
singing.
was waiting.
Happy birthday.
I was going, getting ready.
Yeah. Good. I'm sorry to cut you off.
No problem, sir. No problem. But what I'll note about both of those holidays, Juneteenth, Dr. King's birthday, their efforts were pioneered by persons who wanted the government to acknowledge these milestones and historic persons. But what I'd like for us to start to think about, first and foremost, that one of the presidents or persons in power who passed Juneteenth, Democrat, the person in power that helped to pass or sign the legislation 1983, President Ronald Reagan, Republican. It's not about parties for us. We should have a commitment to our history, our legacy, and claiming our own narrative. If we're looking for the approvement or for the acknowledgement from outside other venues and places or persons to approve of or disapprove of, then I think we're missing a very important mark. Like the freedom that our ancestors fought for was something innately in them. No law, no chain could take that resilience, that resolve to live in the face of white supremacy. There's a quote by Dr. West. I'll do my best to get it proper. He speaks about, in the face of all this white supremacy, Black people still produce love warriors, people who created art, blues, jazz, contributed to, again, the cultural output of this nation. The greatest export is Black culture. So we can't put all the eggs in the basket of thinking that the acknowledgement of the federal government, the same federal government that gives you a Dr. King birthday, is the same federal government that spied on him, conspired to have him commit suicide. J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI considered him seditious, etc. The same, federal government that we see that has the capacity to pass a Juneteenth also has the capacity to pass laws that are removing Black figures from the historic narrative, or attempting to whitewash and omit that if we allow them, right? So there's the power of the narrative. So we take this day and we use it, I think, as, again, not a day off, but to commemorate, to read, to maybe ponder and reflect on what freedom may mean. Are we still in some way enslaved, in bondage? I spoke about the enslavement or captivity of being poor, right? Being born in a poor house, you get a poor education, poor job, and that cycle of poverty is at times, for many of our people, generational. It's passed down and it's kept where you're in poor houses, poor communities, poor ways of functioning with the most resources. That's what it means to be a part of what Langston Hughes says, I too sing America, to be a part of this tapestry, to have the opportunity, right, to have the availability of resources, but the anti-Black racism that allowed for the construction of this nation in this 3/5 a person compromise, this 3/5 a person mentality is still here. Right? There's still an attempt to erase Black history, and not only erase Black history, Tell us who our leaders should be. Maybe just one more thought. Tell us who our leaders should be. So there's no doubt Dr. King, an important figure. We should acknowledge Juneteenth. But when we, again, allow others to tell us the way to dictate and commemorate those who have fought for us, then we do ourselves a disservice. We should lift those figures up. We should look to May 19th, El Hajj Malik El Shabazz Day, Brother Malcolm X, Rahimahullah. We can look to March 10th, or the Harriet Tubman Day. We can look to February 14th, Frederick Douglass Day, right? And Negro History Week, originally established by Dr. Carter G. Woodson, be a week that was in alignment with Lincoln's birthday and Frederick Douglass's birthday, expands to be Black History Month. That's important, but every day we should study and honor Black history. Every day is a day for us to appreciate and lift up. And if there's a day where we have a carved out moment to do that, Juneteenth. Today, take a moment and reflect and read. There was a series happening at the Jamaica Performing Arts Center, I believe, where they're showing the whole entire Roots series. I encourage any youth who have not seen, take 2 days to block out to watch the entire Roots series and watch the story of how Hollywood, in that era and time, with the skills and techniques that were available, told a story. And there's different feelings people have around Hollywood depictions of the chattel slavery experience, but that story must be told, right? Films that do a proper job of contextualizing and showing what it meant to tote that barge, lift that bale, films like 12 Years a Slave. There are some that do a work in bringing to the public, bringing to the current generation, maybe something that, again, this freedom of Juneteenth is not just for Black people, right? It's for humanity. If we who want to be just and fair and right should see that was wrong. The Jahiliyyah of people being enslaved and not having rights because of their color, that's wrong. So people who are committed and say they're committed to justice and equity can take place in commemorating and acknowledging this day as well. But then those who descend from the birthing and the creating of this should certainly do our part in building our own and establishing our own. One more thought. I think about during the abolitionist movement, Frederick Douglass didn't like the way the press spoke about the abolitionist struggle. He founds the North Star, right? Creates his own outlet, his own newspaper. We have all this technology now. We should create and have artists. We have Muslims. We have people of conscience creating art, producing, content creating to provide what then is needed. With the art is the knowledge, the ilm. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has for us the best gift in Quran, Sunnah. And I have something to say as well about the cultural inheritance I have of this tradition of people in the face of.
I'm stuck right there and just address my brother Mustafaa here that this is the consequence of we're getting all this information, but when you have a professional doctor in rhetoric, I have to do a better job in trying to shorten some of the responses so we can kind of get some
we'll work together with more.
Yes. No, it's wonderful information. I'm just trying to squeeze as much out of this that we possibly can. There are a number of particularly African Americans who recognize that Juneteenth came about as a national holiday almost out of the blue. It felt, when we look at the struggle, as Dr. Jamel has referenced, the long, drawn-out struggle and all of the congressional resolutions and everything that had to be put in place before Dr. King his birthday was actually acknowledged as a national holiday. But then you look at, it seemed to me, here in North Carolina, that Juneteenth just kind of sprung up on the nation. But then when we look into it a little deeper, we find that it came about to a large degree, in my humble opinion, it came about to a large degree because of the outrage and the collective presence on the streets all across the United States of angry Black, white, and red and brown people in the streets because of the public execution of George Floyd. It was almost 1 year, close to the date in which George Floyd was murdered. I think it was May 25th of 2020. And then this holiday came about in June of 2021. And that was surely a fast track. And so many think that Juneteenth, they kind of denigrate the holiday itself because they said it was a pacification for people who were very angry about this public execution and how they were taking the occasion of the murder of George Floyd and extending that into so many other aspects of life and calling for police reform. And many were calling for the abolition of police and defunding police, a number of different iterations of how that should be addressed and dealt with. So, Brother Mustafaa, if you could comment on, and Dr. Jamel raised this issue, he started to introduce this issue. What attitude, what spirit should people of African descent in particular, and Muslims of African descent, and the entire Muslim community, what attitude should we bring to this particular occasion? You know, we've talked a little bit about how people just do other antisocial things or just do nothing, goof off. But what is it that Muslims of African descent, the Muslim community in this country in general, what is it that we should bring? What do we have to infuse into this national celebration so that we can get more to the root of how we should envision this and how it should enhance our involvement and struggle for justice?
Well, when I look at it and I hear what you just said about how people took this event was kind of brought into existence in different places because of George Floyd. The fact of the matter is, police brutality, misconduct, and murder has been going on way before I was even thought of. All of my life, we've dealt with that issue. And I think one of the things that we can infuse into this whole thought process is that I think we too often get comfortable quick. When I look at what our forefathers went through, and foremothers for that matter, they just went out and did it. When you think about people, I think Dr. Jamel talked about it, and some of the genius that was created in the worst of times, when you get people like Benjamin Franklin, Paul Laurence Dunbar, Dr. Daniel Hale Williams, Charles Drew, Gwendolyn Brooks, Harriet Tubman, et cetera, et cetera.
Come on, keep it
All
going.
all those people that came about in the worst of times under some of the worst conditions, much worse than what we're going through right now. Even though we still have a struggle, it's a different kind of struggle. I'm fortunate to have lived long enough, and I have a little bit of history in my family. My maternal grandfather was born in 1865. 10 months after the 13th Amendment and 5 months after Juneteenth, after that thing. And he was born in Russell County, Alabama, married my grandmother. They had 14 children. They moved to the north, to East Chicago, Indiana. He joined he had his own business. He was a shoe cobbler. He made shoes. And fixed shoes. He opened a shoe shop, called it in Ethiopian Shoe Shop. So he was way beyond his time. And he joined the UNIA, the United Negro Improvement Association, with Marcus Garvey. My mother tells me the story about how he had them all packed up, ready to go back to Africa when Garvey was arrested and deported. He lived through Jim Crow, the Red Summer, Tulsa race massacre, the formation of the Nation of Islam, the Great Depression, school desegregation, Brown versus Board of Education, the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement in 54, COINTELPRO in 56, the March on Washington, and many other things. And before he died in 1966. So he had 101 years of doing this. And I never saw the kind of forlornness that I see with some of us, or I think that, and I hate to use this term because it's been used a lot. What do you call it when you have self-pity, or what's the word for it? Where a lot of people are just feeling like they're the victim mentality. And there's a reason people feel like that, because many are victims, So I think that what we can bring is that many of us, we have to be steadfast in our approach to this issue, that the struggle continues. I remember when I was in college, we all said that the struggle continues, that our parents had my grandparents had a struggle to get free from slavery. My parents had a struggle, and now we are in the struggle. We have a struggle, and now our generation, my kids, my grandkids, etc., are going to have different levels of the same struggle. And what we have to do is be virulent and actually stay in the fight and show some steadfastness and some resolve that we're going to do what we have to do regardless of who's in office, regardless of what we're faced with. We have to have that same resolve that our forefathers and mothers had. And that's what I hope we can bring, because, you know, I'm a person that looks for an answer. I want to see a solution. I don't just want to talk about it. I want to see it happen. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's if we're not satisfied, if we don't just get placated, you know, where we're just comfortable, and then something will happen and it'll stir us up, and we'll forget that this stuff has been going on forever. How many people have been killed in recent years? You know, when you talk about Freddie Gray and Tamir Rice and Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, I mean, and the list goes on and on and on and on. So those are some of the things we have to be virulent about that, but we also need to show some direction and some guidance for our communities, because our communities are suffering not just from lack of knowledge, but lack of discipline. And so those are the things that I hope that we can bring to this. And those are the things that I know that we have to bring to it.
Right.
Hey, ma'am, can I just...
before you do that, let me just make one point, and I'll jump right out of the way. I just want to invite our viewing and listening audience that this is an interactive webinar. Whatever comment or question that you have to our guests, you can put it in the chat. It will come up. We'll see the questions, and they will respond to your questions. So let's take advantage of the interactive nature of the conversation that we're having. Dr. Jamel.
Yeah, briefly, sir. I want to thank Brother Carroll for sharing that sojourn and story of his foremothers and forefathers. And those stories must be archived and told to the next generation. I have a thought around the need for intergenerational dialogue, what I think this discussion is, and I'm fortunate for it, and how I think that could be a great transferring of the story to the next generation so that they're aware, that they know. We used to say, stay woke. Right now, all of a sudden, it's become pejorative, but it means stay conscious, stay aware, be alert. Don't be lulled into a day-to-day kind of routine, which is, we have to look at the interlocking forces of capitalism, right? Us being, again, this is a colonial project, even itself being enslaved. So there's a lot of factors we consider. But I wanted to comment on the journey, and then my own journey, bear witness to my being the product of the Great Migration, this discussion of migration, this discussion of movements of people. But one of the greatest migrations in this nation's history is Black people leaving the South, getting out of the Jim Crow harm and terror of lynching and mob attacks. And my grandmother left Talladega Springs, Alabama, went up to Chicago. Chicago was too fast for her, so she came to New York. Stayed in New York for 30 years, right?
Chicago was too fast, so she came to New York.
New York, brother.
I'm sorry, I had to say something.
Jumped out of the pot into the fire.
Right? Meets my grandfather, and a few generations. My grandfather, my father, my mother. I'm here, a product of them coming to a space where I'm privileged to have access to resources and to have opportunities to be an educator and teacher, but there's still all across the nation, no doubt, anti-Black legislation and policies that are harming, and that harm has visited us and our people in ways that still haunt us. I want to note, as much as we look at June 19th, 2025 as Juneteenth, I want each of us to take a moment and consider June 17th in 2015, when Dylan Roof entered the Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. That was 10 years ago to this Tuesday. And I think I'm inaccurate in noting that it's been 10 years. And just take note and research that for yourself. That's not too distant to note that there has been, and I can think of more recent occurrences, acts of aggression and violence on Black bodies. So why I'm a part of the ICNA-CSJ particular affiliate Muslim Alliance for Black Lives, I sincerely feel that our dean gives us the tools to enjoin good, forbid evil, and to see the jahiliyyah of racism and that ignorance and say, no, we won't stand for that. And to be a part of movements and efforts that are valuing all life. So let's get some other folks asking some questions if they're.
Yeah. Right now we still do not have any questions or comments from anyone. You don't have to ask a question. You can make a comment. We encourage you to join us in this very important discussion that we're having right now. I think when we reflect upon as well the that the Muslim population here in the United States, as often as the African American contribution to this Islamic presence in this part of the world, and the contributions that starting from that forced um, importation, almost like products. We were like products being sold like cattle and cows and chickens and everything else. Uh, that oftentimes the contributions that those who have embraced Islam from this African American community has oftentimes been ignored. And I'm not trying to set up this dichotomy between those who are indigenous to this land, because Muslims of African descent, to a large degree, were here before any other large group of people coming into the country other than the original inhabitants, the Native American people of this land. So there's nothing, but through this force importation, this chattel slavery that kidnapped us. Had the occasion to go to Goree Island and participating in a conference in Senegal last month. And it was my first opportunity to actually, I've read a lot about it. I've talked to a lot of people who have gone there, but to actually feel almost the vibration standing in these holding cells and standing there in front of this, door of no return, and seeing the Atlantic and all of that through this door of no return. It was a really emotional, overwhelming almost experience for those of us who truly had a connection to that particular experience. Uh, but I want us to, if we could comment, Brother Mustafaa and Brother Jamel, comment on how Islam brings us together as humanity, just as different branches of the same family. And oftentimes, what I've experienced as a Muslim in this country is that too often, because of some of the more uh, privileged positions that our immigrant brothers and sisters have been able to just easily just coming into this country, and all of the not the self-denial, but the denial of access to a lot of these jobs and education opportunities that the people who built the country, literally the descendants of African enslaved people, um, and so I guess I'm just trying to articulate this desire in my head and in my heart that the struggle of oppressed people in this country should not just be the struggle of the oppressed people in this country. And those who have been granted much from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given as his risk to people have a responsibility, not so much to give away your money and resources, but have a responsibility to use that privileged position to help oppressed people in this country, and not just uh, continue to enrich themselves and take advantage of these opportunities that others till this moment are still being denied. So could you comment on this or anything else that either one of you would like to comment on?
Well,
Brother Carroll, go ahead.
this is a big one. And I've been fortunate to be able to work with all of our communities, all the Muslim Ummah. I've been fortunate to be exposed to many of them, and I'm still working hard in my own community, etc. What I see in the Muslim community, one is they don't have an understanding. I think those folks, those are our brothers and sisters who've come from other places, really don't have a good understanding of the culture of this country. They don't understand. You'll hear people say, "Well, why don't you all work harder?" Or why don't you? I said, "Well, the fact that you think that we haven't figured that out." Why do you think that we were brought here? Because of our ability to work hard. We had a reputation during my grandparents' parents, and I think it caught it start to dissipate after our generation. But we had a reputation for working hard. The black college system, the historical black universities, all those college systems were developed because we saw a need for education, because we were denied education in some of the other institutions. So those things we've thought about. And I think what it happens is they don't understand, many don't, I don't think all, I think just there's a significant number, because I've seen some brothers and sisters who actually embrace us. So I don't want to just make this stereotype. It's not a stereotype, but there are too many who really don't understand the culture that has been created and the struggle that's been going on. So, you come in after the heavy lifting, after everybody's gotten lynched and murdered, and you couldn't even vote. Most of the people, if you go to the Southern Poverty Law Center, most of the people that were lynched in the Hall of Martyrs, many of them were lynched just for telling people to vote. So now here you come, and you're here, and we embrace you, and we stand up for Palestine, we stand up for Syria, we stand up for India and the Muslims in India and the Guidas and so forth and so on. But there was a brother that said something very profound. I was in a meeting, and he said, "But will you stand up with us in Chicago? Will you stand up for us in New York and Houston and Maryland and all these places?" So I think this is where we were talking about the intra-faith stuff comes on, but it's even bigger than that. That we have got to, I think that we have got to integrate our community in a real way, not just symbolic, just don't come to dinner, but also, get involved with each other so that we understand what's going on. Because we're not sitting over here with our, sitting on our thumbs or something. This has been a real struggle. And now, evident, I'm going to say this and let it go, but I think that the other thing is, I think the youth especially are beginning to see the intersectionality of the struggle, that they see that the struggle here is just like the struggle that's over in Palestine and other places, except over there, it's white supremacy on steroids. So it was on steroids here, but they just unhinged there. So I think that that's our hope for the future, is to build on what we see happening right now.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think that we've gone back we've gone backwards as well. Dr. Jamel.
Yeah, just briefly, I'll say, and thank you, Brother Carroll. Thank you, Imam Khalid, for the question. The Quran tells us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made us nations and tribes so we can get to know each other. Best amongst us is those with taqwa, that God consciousness. Our Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam says in his last sermon on the day Arafah, an Arab's not better than a non-Arab, black not better than a white. It's taqwa, God consciousness. So the people of good conscience, lend me an attentive ear for a moment. Right? Let us be amongst that community of people who are our Nabi, praise and peace be upon him, says when one part of the body hurts, right? So our ummah is one, no doubt. But there's no doubt that there are jamaats, and each of our jamaats, I'm not learned in Islamic jurisprudence, but I do know about urf, like the culture of a community, and if it's in accordance with Sharia and it's permissible, then it can be upheld. So there are cultural parts of our experiences as African Americans that are permissible, good, that we shouldn't have to throw away. And when our brothers and sisters who come here, let's say, for instance, post the 1965 Immigration Act that opened the doors for many of our brothers and sisters to come here, there has been an effort to, come to our masjids that are established, the historic ones that again pioneered by movements like the Nation of Islam, then embracing Quran and Sunnah by Imam W. Muhammad, and then other Quran and Sunnah based Islamic movements throughout our history that we take note of. We come together and there's this mindset of more knowledge, our way is better. There's a difference, and that's just in my small time in this on this planet Earth and in my journey in this deen. So I pray that that interfaith that our brother Carroll speaks about takes place where the young generation, this YM, young Muslims, and other youth organizations are having not just Eid celebrations that are kind of masjid to masjid, but clearly, you know, a mixing of our Somali, African American, Arab, Desi, right? But intentional, continued efforts to mobilize and form coalition, and in those efforts, see the larger landscape of struggle. Like the landscape is all across this globe, and we have to struggle and resist that injustice, that zulm, where we are. And as Booker T. Washington would say, right, cast down your bucket where you are.
There you are.
New York. And I'm here doing, inshallah, the work feasibility line in New York, and working with our brother in Texas, and working with our imam, inshallah, in North Carolina, and anywhere else where we're invited to do the work.
Right. And I would be remiss, our convener in New York City, all of New York City, would really give me a hard time if we didn't talk about MABL itself. All three of us have association with MABL. Actually, right now, I'm the national chairman for MABL. Who would help bring into this discussion what MABL is all about? Brother Mustafaa, Brother Jamel, or myself? If someone could just tell our viewing audience, and I'm assuming we have someone watching and hearing. If not, maybe people will catch it on the the replay.
Inshallah. I don't mind, Brother Carroll can. And again, what makes MABL this outlet, this effort to, under the ICNA-CSJ banner, leverage the diversity of the Muslim community, right? Look at historic masjids founded in urban inner city areas. I think of a Philadelphia, I think of a Dallas, I think of a New York, I think of Chicago, that were established and were many of the first houses of worship when many of our immigrant brothers and sisters came here, right? And many of those same masjids now have pioneers who have transitioned. I'm at a masjid right now that, again, established in 1979, coming out of the Nation of Islam, embracing Quran and Sunnah under the leadership of Imam W. Muhammad, right? That great miracle of the Shahada, right, in this community. It's still worth inquiry and study. But what MABL looks to do is to have these relationships with masjids, organizations that are committed and want to use our resources, use our human capital, our network to address communities that have been historically underserved. And I can't think of a people who have been more historically underserved and marginalized than, again, the Afro-American, those who have descended since the beginning. Before Columbus landed, we were here, right? There's studies of Mansa Musa's brother, Abu Bakr, making his way here. Like, so Black people have been, we've been here, and we've been building. And in the face of this, again, form of institutionalized systemic harm, we asked our ummah to not be a part of that injustice. It's easy to come here and then people assimilate. They want to. There's something to be said around. You come to this the nation and going up and having the upward mobility you're looking for, but that does not mean that in that upward progress there needs to be a diminishing of the Black persons who have helped build this nation, or a denigrating of that struggle to continue. We know work. We have many doctors in our community. We've produced many thinkers and engineers and creators of ideas and content that have shaped so much. You look at the traffic light. I can go through innovation and invention after invention that has been found from Black intellect. So, and our art. We have many things we've contributed that I think should be taught and preserved.
Very good. Brother Mustafaa, any closing comments?
Well, no, I can't add much to it, except I know that when we established MABL, when our first meeting, we were talking about, one of my pet peeves was that the Muslim community has failed to leverage the diversity of the community for benefit. And that's both ways, and not just talking about helping us because we poor Muslims. But I think that and I think you might have said it, Brother Imam, that there's a lot to be gleaned from this experience that we've had, that the African American Muslims have had an experience that I think there's a lot of information you can glean from it. Not that it's what's happening today, but there is so much information that we have culturally and otherwise that can be gleaned, and vice versa, that we can glean information, our brothers and sisters who are coming from other places, that we've not, leveraged that power that we have in the community. When you look at the makeup of the Muslim community in general, it really mirrors the Jewish community. I mean, you got almost 20% of medical doctors, 30% engineers, and 60% plus are formally educated. And that's not to say all the education is all, because you can be educated and be a bad person. But it does mean, yeah, we have to take advantage of the human capital, as Dr. Jamel just mentioned. We have to take advantage of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with, and start to leverage those things for our benefit in this community, because there's no way that we should be treated like we're being treated right now. So without me going more further, I'll just stop right there.
I want to thank both of you for the very thoughtful insights that you have shared with our audience this evening, and I want to encourage others to join us in these monthly discussions. And we are over our time right now. So again, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide all of us to do the things that are most pleasing to Him, that will be beneficial for us in this world and in the next. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam wa
rahmatullah. Thank you.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Are we off? Okay. How do I get out of this? Okay.